Ukraine news, Live, Russia suffering 824 casualties per day, UK intelligence suggests. Russia has likely suffered an average of 824 casualties a day over the past 2 weeks, Britain's Ministry of Defense has said. It is the highest rate of casualties since Vladimir Putin ordered his troops to invade Ukraine on February 24 last year and 4 times the rate reported over the June-July period. Ukraine was also continuing to suffer from a high attritional rate, the MOD added in a statement on Sunday. Earlier, Russian mercenary group Wagner said it had taken control of a village near the key city of Bakhmut in Ukraine's eastern Donetsk Oblast region. Yevgeny Prigozhin, the group's founder, said his troops had taken the village of Krasna Ora on the northern edge of embattled Bakhmut, which has seen intense fighting in recent months. The claims could not immediately be independently verified. Kiev's top military commander, Valery Zelensky, said on Saturday that Ukraine continues to hold Bakhmut, trying to stabilize the front line around it. Russia fires missiles and drones in waves to evade air defense systems. KYIV Ukraine, Russia targeted Ukraine's already battered infrastructure with drones, rockets and cruise missiles on Friday, raining fire on cities around the country as President Volodymyr Zelensky wrapped up a push in Europe for more, faster support from Kiev's allies. On the ground, Russia has been ramping up the pace of its winter offensive, Ukrainian officials say, pouring troops and equipment into eastern Ukraine to try to swallow up new territory as the first anniversary of the war approaches and Kiev waits for more powerful weapons from the West. Military analysts have said that Russia has made small tactical gains over the past week, often at great cost, but as of Friday morning there was no evidence of a major breakthrough despite the heavy fighting. The Ukrainian Air Force described Friday's assault as a massive attack and said that it had involved 71 cruise missiles and 7 Iranian-made drones. Ukraine said in a statement that it had shot down 61 of the cruise missiles and 5 of the drones. Ukrainian officials maintain that 2 of the Russian missiles had crossed the airspace of Romania, a NATO country, even as Bucharest rejected the claim. Mr. Zelensky, who repeated the assertion, condemned the attacks and used the episode as an opportunity to rally his country's allies. Their targets were civilian infrastructure, Mr. Zelensky, who was traveling back to Ukraine after a stop in Poland, said in a video statement. He added, "This is terror that can and must be stopped by the world." Since October, Russia has launched more than a dozen major strikes on Ukraine's energy facilities, as well as many smaller attacks, in a campaign to impair the power supply and leave civilians without power, heat and light during the winter. The full extent of the damage of the strikes on Friday was not immediately clear, but energy infrastructure was hit in 6 regions of the country, according to Ukraine's energy minister, Herman Galishchenko. Emergency shutdowns have been introduced in many regions, he said in a statement, adding that energy workers were racing to restore supply. The state-owned power utility, Ukrenergo, confirmed damage to several high-voltage infrastructure sites in the eastern, western and southern regions of Ukraine. Over Kyiv, the capital, Ukrainian fighter jets raced across the sky to intercept inbound missiles, and air defense systems thundered. 10 missiles were shot down over the city, and power transmission lines were damaged, according to the mayor, Vitaly Klitschko. He said engineers were working to restore the lines. Russia also launched a large attack of nearly 3 dozen S-300 anti-aircraft missiles from Belgorod in Russia and the occupied city of Tokmak in southern Ukraine, toward targets in Kharkiv and Zaporizhia. Ukraine's air defense system cannot shoot down the anti-aircraft missiles, the Air Force said. In southern Ukraine, Anatoly Kurdiv, the secretary of the Zaporizhia City Council, said that at least 17 missile strikes had been reported in less than an hour. It was the highest rate of missile attacks the city has encountered since the start of the full-scale invasion nearly a year ago, he said. The extent of the damage and number of casualties were not yet known, he said early Friday in a statement. 4 missiles were also shot down around the southern city of Kryvyi Rih, including 3 within the city limits, the local authorities said. In the northeastern city of Kharkiv, at least 10 explosions were reported overnight, Ola Sinyhubov, the head of the regional administration, said in a statement. They appeared to be aimed at critical infrastructure, but the scale of the damage was not immediately clear. Mr. Zelensky this week made a whirlwind European visit, only his second trip outside the country since the war began, pleading in London, Paris and Brussels for more and heavier weapons to fend off Russia's new offensive. The Ukraine conflict continues to evolve, dragging the limits of Western support along with it. Last month saw a scramble for tanks, with NATO countries at odds over whether to meet Kiev's pleas until a reluctant Germany and the US finally turned to form a united front with Britain, Poland and other allies. This week, with air superiority the talk of the battlefield, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky embarked on a trip around Europe to urge his partners into encouraging steps towards the supply of fighter jets. Britain, which less than a fortnight ago appeared to rule out sending either of its active models of warplane, was the first stop, and Prime Minister Rishi Sunak welcomed his counterpart from Kiev with a pledge to train Ukrainian pilots to fly NATO-compatible aircraft. After Mr. Zelensky thanked the UK in advance for sending powerful English planes, he and the Prime Minister were photographed wearing fighter pilot helmets, in what was widely seen as a nod towards London's intentions. Mr. Sunak also said he had ordered his Defence Secretary to inquire as to which jets the UK could feasibly supply from its fleets of Typhoons and F-35s. On Thursday, the Ukrainian president headed to Paris, where he met French President Emmanuel Macron and German President Olaf Scholz. France had earlier signaled a willingness to supply jets, while Germany had rejected Kiev's pleas and criticized what he called a constant competition to outbid each other when it comes to weapons systems. After a summit in Brussels with leaders of all 27 European Union countries, Mr. Zelensky said he had heard from several of his counterparts that they were willing to supply jets. The Kremlin said any aircraft would lead to an escalation of tension, prolong the conflict and make it more and more painful for Ukraine, echoing the warning given after Western tank pledges. Ukraine expects Russia to launch a new offensive in the coming weeks and fears that it will lose ground in key areas such as the eastern Donbass region, where Moscow has focused much of its fighting force after early failures last spring. Western fighter jets are thought to be vital in helping Ukraine to fend off Russian attacks from the skies and pushing Moscow's forces into retreat. Here we take a look at what planes are available and how they could help Ukraine's defense. The Eurofighter Typhoon makes up the bulk of the RAF's aerial fighting force, and experts think it is the plane most likely to be sent by Britain. The Typhoon has capabilities for air-to-air combat with the Russian fleets of Su-35s that are in use over Ukraine, and can also hit ground targets with missiles. The UK has 118 Typhoons in operation, next to 15 F-35Bs. Former Prime Minister Boris Johnson said the best single use for the Typhoons would be in Ukraine. Professor Justin Bronk, a senior fellow at the Royal United Services Institute, said, F-35Bs are out of the question in this context for a host of technical, security, political and legal reasons. That leaves the RAF Typhoon force, and in particular, the remaining Tranche 1 jets, which are due to be retired around 2025. Britain may end up in a similar position as Poland last month, when Warsaw's desire to send Leopard 2 tanks could not be fulfilled unilaterally due to a requirement for consent from producer nation Germany. Downing Street said, in terms of permissions for the two different types, in order to use a Typhoon in a country other than the UK, you would need permission from the Typhoon Consortium. That's Italy, Spain, Germany and obviously us. Typhoons serve several European air fleets, including Germany's. Though Mr. Scholz earlier ruled out sending fighter jets, his turn in the tanks debate suggests his position is not concrete. Mr. Zelensky said after his meeting with Mr. Scholz that he felt he always had to convince Germany to help Ukraine, though he did not say his plea for planes had been rejected. Some analysts caution that teaching Ukrainian pilots to fly Western planes could take up to 18 months, though British Air Marshal Greg Bagwell said trained military pilots could learn to command a new jet in as little as 4 weeks. Non-military pilots could be combat-ready in 6 months, he said. Putin massing 1,800 tanks and 700 aircraft for new Ukraine assault. Russia is massing around 1,800 tanks, 700 aircraft and 500,000 men for a new assault on Ukraine, which will start in just 10 days, it has been warned. Ukraine has stated that Russian President Vladimir Putin is stocking up on weapons and ammunition in preparation for a massive new offensive in the coming weeks. There are now fresh fears that the despot will launch an attack that will coincide with the first anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which began on February 24, 2022. In what is being called a zero-day assault plan, Russia has reportedly massed hundreds of thousands of soldiers, thousands of tanks, and hundreds of warplanes for the invasion on already heavily war-torn Ukraine. And the Eastern European country fears the assault will be much bigger than last year's wave, which stormed across the country and towards its capital, Kiev. Ukraine sources are claiming Russia is massing precisely 1,800 tanks, 3,950 armored vehicles, 400 fighter jets, and 300 helicopters to carry out the attack, the Sun report. They added Putin has 2,700 artillery guns and 810 rocket launchers for a deadly new wave of attacks, reports Foreign Policy. A Ukrainian official said, "It's much bigger than what took place in the first wave." He also predicted that Moscow is not paying attention to any casualties or losses, and so due to the carelessness of the Kremlin, in the next 10 days, we expect a new, huge invasion. And according to Ukrainian intelligence, the new spring offensive could involve 300,000 to 500,000 soldiers. Russia is, reportedly, already believed to have approximately 300,000 troops operating on the ground in Ukraine. And it's believed another 200,000 men from the recent mobilizations will be called up to fight in the offensive. There are also grave concerns among Ukrainian officials in Kyiv that Putin could also stage a new round of mobilization to further bolster his forces for the assault. Speaking out about the attack, Andriy Chernyak, an official in Ukraine's military intelligence, told the Kyiv Post, "We've observed that the Russian occupation forces are redeploying additional assault groups, units, weapons, and military equipment." According to the military intelligence of Ukraine, Putin gave the order to seize all of the territories of Donetsk and Luhansk regions by March. This follows Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's visit to the UK this week, where he renewed his push to persuade Prime Minister Rishi Sunak to deliver more weapons to Ukraine. Zelensky also traveled to Brussels for talks with EU leaders this week, as he urged his Western allies and its 27 member states to speed up the delivery of promised tanks and weapons, including badly needed heavy armor. Meanwhile, last night, Zelensky accused Germany of foot-dragging over the provision of advanced weapons to help repel Putin's invasion. In a show of frustration, the Ukrainian president said he was constantly having to convince Chancellor Olaf Scholz to help him and his country kick Russia out. He told German news website Der Spiegel, "I have to exert pressure to help Ukraine and constantly convince him that this help is not for us but for Europeans. Our relationship to Germany goes in waves, it is up and down." Despite this, Mr. Scholz yesterday said the EU would send a signal of unity and solidarity, and can show that we will continue our support for Ukraine in defending its independence and integrity.